So I am delighted with our panel this week. We have an interesting conversation planned to provide you with lots of insights and information to help support neurodiversity in the workplace. I'm going to introduce each of our guests, but I'm going to let them tell you a little bit about themselves and their organizations, after introducing all of them. So first of all, hello, Karen Clark, Director of Operations at A Spectrum. So you can see Karen waving her hand there. Sophia Manga, who's an Executive Assistant at A Spectrum. Welcome, Sophia. Did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Yes.
Okay, Tammy Morris, who is the Network Leader at the Neurodiversity Centers of Excellence at EY Canada. Welcome, Tammy.
Thank you. Welcome. It's glad to be here.
And finally, Mohit Verma, who's a Senior Consultant at EY Canada as well. Welcome, Mohit.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay, with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to turn this over to Tammy to tell us a little bit about her background and what Ernst & Young EY is doing in this field.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining. So I have a squiggly or windy career path, some in clinical and academia and a fair bit of management consulting, most in the US, and returned happily to Canada a few years ago to help expand our neurodiversity centers of excellence for EY to Canada. So apologize for the mouthful, the title of our program, to our interpreters. I'm going to pass off and let Mohit introduce himself and just give a bit of background to the program.
Thank you, Tammy. Hello, everyone. My name is Mohit Verma, and I'm a senior consultant at EY, and I'm part of Neurodiversity Center of Excellence based in Toronto office. I joined EY in 2020, and it's been 2 years that I'm working here. I was part of the pilot initiative of NCOE, which started 2 years back. The pilot initiative started in the Toronto office. For purpose of today's talk, and in past, we have seen that employers can be anxious about the terminology as we define neurodiversity as a part of our greater biodiversity. Some are tall, some are short. Depending upon which studies you read, an estimated 15 to 20% of the global population have brains that are wired differently and identify themselves as neurodivergent. The other 80% or the masses that are working, that we say are the working world, was primarily designed for the norm, or what can be called neurotypical, in that they fall in the middle of a bell curve or majority of performance. Let me share a quick background on EY and the NCOE. EY is a global professional services firm offering consulting, tax, audit, strategy, and transaction advice for companies across all sectors. EY was the first professional services firm to launch a neurodiversity program to intentionally infuse more neurodiverse talent into the firm. While we recognize and have many thousands of neurodivergent professionals across all ranks and roles within the firm, we knew that some people were facing barriers to employment and firms were not making efforts to tap into all potential sources of talent. Early on, EY realized that required throwing out the traditional behavior interview and reconstructing a hiring process that was transparent and evaluated candidates based on their skills and competencies, and not their process that was transparent and not their social confidence. It also meant creating circles of support and mentorship for professionals who may not easily navigate a large global firm for the first time or find mentorship easily on their own. In 2016, when the NCOE was launched, there was a great demand around emerging technologies. With our expansion to Canada and other countries, we have expanded the scope of NCOE work, including business consulting, tax, assurance, and other work. infusing neurodiversity into all of our AI teams. EY is known for boasting all forms of diversity and intersectionality, and for an inclusive and welcoming culture. Our business is our people, and we are client serving and specialized consultants, helping to solve a wide range of business and technology challenges. And we know that having different experiences and mind around the table contribute to our success. Over the past years, our EY clients have noticed our successful inclusion of employees with disabilities and asked us to help them in their own efforts around accessibility and inclusion. And we are pleased to see more companies adding a disability hiring strategy to their diversity strategies, as we know that majority of companies have diversity agendas and have historically overlooked disability. And this was all about EY and NCOE. I would like to pass it to Karen.
Thank you so much, Mohit. And that's fascinating. And really, you hit on some really interesting touch points that I hope to circle back on when we get more into the nitty gritty of our convo here today. I wanted to thank the Discoverability Network for the opportunity to sort of chat and have a really authentic conversation about employment and folks with disability and how the two intersect. I am co-founder actually of A-Spectrum. A-Spectrum started 2 years ago during the pandemic. Since then, we've secured some national contracts because of sort of our ability to tap into a niche to support folks as they integrate into the workplace. So we provide integration work support for folks that are moving into the workplace or who are looking for employment. So we've been really successful and supported folks recently in the past 2 years, upwards of 120 folks. We've helped secure employment and retention, more importantly. So that's part of our journey, and I'll tell you a little bit more specifically about who we are and how we got started as we move through the conversation. I also wanted to just acknowledge Sophia Mangov, who is also our executive assistant and my colleague, and I'm very excited to share the panel with her.
Hi, everyone. As she said, my name is Sophia, and I am the executive assistant at A-Spectrum. I think it's about a year now, or almost it's going to be a year in March, actually. I was drawn to this organization because for most of my life, I've had a deep passion for the inclusion revolution. Being neurodiverse myself, specifically with ADHD, I gravitated towards organizations that supported individuals on the spectrum. I worked with Best Buddies, Grandview, volunteered in local different abilities classes, and now working with A-Spectrum, and I'd like to sort of grow here, and it's wonderful. So I'm excited to sort of share more of my story and give some tips on, personal career journeys and paths.
I would also like to point out that in Sophia's picture, she's having a fantastic hair day. And she could actually double as like maybe a shampoo model if this A-Spectrum thing that doesn't work out.
Thank you. Everybody here has the most beautiful smiles too. So when I get a compliment, I pass it back on. You guys are all gorgeous people. Excited to talk.
So I guess I can sort of jump into a little bit more about who A-Spectrum is and what we do, or Tammy, did you want to maybe speak a bit more to EY?
I think Mohit covered it. I know you had a video as well, Karen. I don't know if you wanted to.
I'd love to. Yeah, guys, I really am excited to share this video. So the backstory behind this video is I'm a mom of 3 kids. We were off during the pandemic. I was like sort of on a break from work. And my son had just graduated from U of T. My son also identifies as neurodivergent, and I have a daughter on the spectrum. And so we created A-Spectrum because we were kind of looking for a way to bridge some gaps that we had both identified. I'd worked in the labor market for 20 years and, specifically working at supporting people with disabilities And my son was a person with lived experience. So we were trying to kind of, what are some of the gaps that we've identified? So just sitting around the kitchen table at home, that's kind of how A Spectrum came to be. My daughter, again, who identifies as being on the spectrum, was really excited and wanted to contribute. So she's into digital animation. So she produced this video to kind of encapsulate who A Spectrum is. So I don't know, Jeff, if you can hit play on this for me and we can show you.
Hello, we are A Spectrum. We are a unique employment support and recruitment agency that specializes in individualized supports for the neurodivergent community. We are about building long-term working relationships and maintaining them. We see the employment picture and can support you in reframing it. A Spectrum helps you look for a job, start a job, and keep a job. Our team of coaches specialize in helping individuals communicate their needs to their employer for you to be successful. We will work with you to develop skills that lean on your unique strengths and showcase them to your future employer. A Spectrum, connecting aptitude to opportunity.
That's
So
great,
that's-
Karen. I've seen it, but I didn't know your daughter created, so that's wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm a proud mama when I show that one. I always get a little emotional. Thanks, Tammy. So yeah, so I guess we should probably get right into it. I'm curious to kind of start to get deeper into the conversation that we're hoping to sort of suss out today. And so I'm thinking that those of us that work in the field often make recommendations and support employers to become more accessible and more inclusive in their hiring. But I'm just wondering if maybe Mohit and Sophia, you possibly could share perspectives of lessons that you've learned in your employment journey, any tips that you might want to share with your fellow panelists or folks that are watching, and job seekers, career seekers, or people that are currently working that are looking to advance their careers. Sophia, maybe I'll tap you in on this first, and maybe you can share any sort of some of your wisdom and experience with us.
So I have sort of three key things that helped me as somebody that had ADHD and struggled with sort of carving out the time to apply for the job, find the job. You know, it was always really hard to sort of schedule my time. So I sought out support and networks and systems that helps sort of like, systems like A Spectrum, like organizations like A Spectrum. I networked a lot, and I went to like conferences that sort of taught me about how I can advocate for myself and stuff, which was always wonderful. But I think one of the most important things I've learned, and I think actually Karen shared this with me during our interview, is that when I was interviewing for this job, was that it's the interview itself is not just about the employer seeing if you're a good fit. It's also, figuring out if that employer is a good fit for you. And it's your chance. The interview is your chance to see if the company, its culture, its accommodation protocol, their management style is a right fit for you. Is this an inclusive space? Is it inclusive enough? And is this employer's overall tone and culture conducive to your personal needs? And I think when I heard that, it was liberating because it took the pressure off of me. And it sort of balanced the pressure out to them too, because it's not just about me, it's about them too. How are they advocating for us? How are they making it more accessible and sort of easy for us to share and express ourselves and share our career, paths? And sorry, I get a little bit flustered, sorry. But like, I think that was probably one of the best advice I've ever had. And I was lucky that she shared it with me, and I'm hoping that, other people will take that to heart and think about it. It's not just about if you're a good fit for them, it's about if they're a good fit for you too.
Yeah, you're in the power seat too, right? It's like an equal opportunity for both of you guys to determine if it's a good fit for one another. Mohit, did you have anything that you sort of wanted to contribute to that and share your experiences in your employment journey?
Yeah, sure, Karen. And thank you, Sophia, for sharing. I totally agree with your insights. During my job hunting process, I focused a lot around identifying what are my interests and my expertise. So there was a certain stage where I would self-reflect as to what I like, doing what I have experience in, what my interests are. I'll note them down. I focus well, I work well when I have something written or to look at, to focus at. And once I have jotted them down, I'll look over various companies. I'll make a list as to what are the companies which hire for these skill set, where I want to thrive, and which uh, the companies that I would like to work over. Some of the job portals I would look for would be LinkedIn. A lot of companies post jobs there, but once you have identified the companies, I'd suggest to go over the company website, because they don't post all the roles over LinkedIn. That way you can maximize your chances and see. The second step was studying the job description. I would spend a lot of time in that phase to identify the keywords which resonate around that role, tweak my resume and cover letter accordingly, and also make sure to use those words and incorporate certain examples from my past experiences that identify such some of the keywords, say analytical skills or problem solving, leadership skills, or relationship building. So I would think back and see the times when I was a leader or I helped clients solve problems, and incorporate those examples in the interview. And would always be upfront about the accommodations that I require, and if that's possible. And also, as Sophia mentioned, that it's not just about the employer evaluating you, but also you evaluating the employer, uh,
Mm.
how the work culture is, what can they accommodate all your needs, and how would you like to say what are your long-term plans, and do they align with the company's goal.
I also think it's a really great idea to ask the employer to give you an example of an accommodation that they've provided for someone. You know, like, can you give me an example of someone that a situation that you've had to accommodate and how that worked out for that individual? If they're not able to do that quite quickly, or if they really kind of give you a lame example, then I would say, maybe that's something to consider as well. And I'm wondering too, Tammy, I was curious, like as an employer, like with EY, when you guys put a posting out, is it more like a wish list? Like, I'm just thinking, because a lot of people get deterred by what
Yeah.
they see as a descriptor on the posting, and they say, oh, I could never qualify for that. I don't have that experience. I don't have that, I don't know that software. Like, can you speak a bit really quickly to like what an employer looks for and what they're hoping for, like the realistic sort of landing somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're challenged, right? We sit in consulting, and the nature of consulting is we'll solve any business problem for anybody across business and technology. So the nature of the job can be hard to describe until we know what the problem is, right? What those day-to-day activities necessarily will be. But what we do know is that, obviously we want opportunities for those accommodations requests, right? As Mohit said, to come early and often, right? So you should actually be hearing those through the hiring process, the asks of what you need, and be able to see some built-in accommodations into the process, hopefully. We're really lucky because, as Sophia said, you're evaluating the employer. Our folks get to know many members of our team before they're actually hired, before they're hired. So that's also helpful. I think on the job posting, right, it's, again, we know the statistics, right? So men will apply for jobs with, 60% of the qualification, women, I think 85, neurodivergent professionals, it's like 95, right? So when you see that long list, that long laundry list, we recommend, right, to break it up into the must-haves and then the nice-to-haves, and then, what's actually required for the job, because we can load things up, but they're not necessary, right, to do the work. So I think those are some of the key tips that we generally try to follow. But I'm curious, so, we've mentioned a couple of things here, and we wanted today to get past, we tend to focus a lot, right, on the disclosure. We know that navigating disclosure for people with non-visible disabilities and differences is challenging, right? There are a lot of decisions and points and opinions about disclosure and self-identification, but also, Sophia, you mentioned sharing information through that process as well about yourself. And I'm just curious, right? If there are times where you feel oversharing, or even being asked to maybe share more than what's relevant or necessary for your job has been an issue.
So I'll first, I have an anecdote that I think is really important to share, but before I do that, I want to sort of, in order to sort of quell my need to overshare or overtalk, the preparing of the interview is super important to me. Laying out questions, having my answers already sort of self-prepared, having my star answers, my star sort of, sorry, I shouldn't say star, but like sort of the most important or like most key sort of examples in my sort of career sort of, sorry again, in my like examples that I've done in my everyday sort of career. So like I have them all prepared and ready to go to sort of quell that need to overshare and overtalk. But there was a specific time in an interview where I did overshare, and I thought maybe it would be, kind of important to share that specific story. So I had this interview that I was very excited about. And a few days before the interview, I found out that I was diagnosed with cancer. So I got to the interview, and I won't explain the first interview so much because it's the second interview that's super important. I literally, because of the cancer, I started to melt. Sweating, heart palpitations, very nervous already. So the thyroid cancer sort of amplified that anxiety to the maximum. During the interview, I looked at myself melting in front of the screen, mascara down my face. And in that moment, I had this intense need to tell everybody why. In the interview, in the middle of a question, I said, everybody, I have cancer. I just found out yesterday. I'm so sorry. It's why I'm melting. We stopped the interview right there, and then they gave me a second chance for another interview. So I was anticipating for this interview for days, preparing my answers and my questions again, and sort of anticipating a thank you to them, explaining why I was melting. So when I started the interview, I began to talk about thyroid cancers and the symptoms and stuff like that. And she literally put her hands up like this. And she said, "We don't need your medical history. Please stop. Let's continue with the interview." And at that point, I understood that maybe what I did was probably not the most professional thing, but I think her reaction was like made me sort of step back and paralyzed me a little bit. And then the rest of the interview sort of fell away. I wasn't able to perform at my best after that. It was very, very, very hard. And I mean, it was an extenuating circumstance. It was very, there's not an every day you find out 3 days before an interview you have cancer, sure. But again, somebody with ADHD, it's really hard to hold it back sometimes. You have to justify yourself, or you have to over explain. And it's sometimes very hard to keep that in.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. There's not a guidebook for how to navigate that situation, for sure. I think, right, from an employer perspective, we can't ask, even though we know in some instances transparency can be helpful, and knowing ways of working can be helpful. And it probably stemmed from that. And we're concerned about protected information and where we can go. So it's really about openness to sharing rather than asking. So
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I can interject.
Sure.
I was just wondering, Sophia, how would you have preferred the employer to handle that situation? Like, what would you have recommended someone do in that situation as an employer?
I think, in a sense, when you see somebody who's very anxious already and sharing something deeply personal and being very vulnerable, maybe start with empathy first, add a bit of empathy to your sort of response. Maybe instead of "stop, can we proceed," say, "Thank you so much for being comfortable to share that with us here. We value that and we appreciate that, but we're excited for this interview, and let's move forward with your specific qualifications." I think some sensitivity every once in a while, sprinkle it with a little sensitivity and empathy, would have probably made it easier for me to continue with that interview, because the anxiety can be quite overwhelming sometimes, especially when you overthink.
Yeah, that's great feedback. Mohit, did you want to comment on this topic?
Yeah, sure. Uh, I'll say that I had kind of a similar experience with one of the interviews where the interviewer was asking a lot about my childhood or the time when I was diagnosed, and I felt that those informations were not relevant with the role that I was interviewing for. So I felt that okay, that's something which is private to me, and I requested them to, whether it's fine if I not share that information with them. So being upfront actually helped in that case. And being in a client-facing role, we have been trained and told that always be mindful about what information you are sharing with the client or even with your peers, because at times the information that we share can be used against us, and for the client they see those information as facts. So we have to make sure that and be really mindful as to what we are sharing, unless it's verified, uh, not to speak about it. And what the employer or anyone else can do is that for one of the projects that I was working during the onboarding step, some of the managers, they asked us a couple of questions, but they provided us the context first as to why they are asking and what is that information about. The questions were about how do I handle stress, whether I'm comfortable around doing presentations for the client, or how do I feel confident about being handling questions on the spot with the client. But they provided context first, that we are asking these questions so that we are making sure that we are providing you with the right role where you are the most comfortable, and the kind of project that is where these situations might come. So if you are comfortable, then we'll give you the opportunity for this role. And that context really helped, and that way I was able to provide the right information, not undershare or overshare.
Yeah, I think, I'm sorry, I was going to say, I think it's relevant, right? It's relevant to sort of self-advocate in teams. All that we do is in teams and our sort of best ways of working. And so, really encouraging that self-advocacy and people to speak out, to say, you know what, I prefer not to be the note taker. That's not my strength. And there can be many reasons why. You may have dyslexia, you may have auditory processing, you may not have great divided attention. It really doesn't matter why, right? This is not my strength area. I would prefer to be the spokesperson. I would prefer, and then the whole team performs better just from knowing, but without necessarily having to go into complete, protected information as well.
And I think, like you had mentioned when we were kind of doing the prepping about this panel, Tammy, you'd mentioned a term that I wasn't familiar with, which was universal design. And I think that enlightened me. Like, I'm so grateful to kind of that you brought that up and that it's now on my radar. And I'm wondering if you could just speak a bit to that really quickly for folks that may not know what that is and how it impacts the workplace as well.
Yeah. I mean, universal design, right? We know that some of the ways that we work that may have been intended for certain individuals or certain groups help everybody, right? So things like providing meeting agendas in advance, recording meetings or using transcripts for people, having the ability to highlight text or close captions, right? So the universal design construct actually came from, this is silly. I spent a lot of my career in Michigan. So the first was actually after, I think it was World War II, when they started with curb cutouts for wheelchairs, right? For veterans coming back from the war. We didn't have curb cutouts before that. So think about now how many people carrying things, everybody, right, relies on curb cutouts with strollers and walkers, et cetera. So that's just one concrete example that everybody benefits, right? And so I think we talk about inclusive design. So universal design is recognizing that we design our working world to benefit everybody. And yes, people with disabilities, but also people are aging and changes in vision and hearing, and it just makes everybody more effective. We look at inclusive design at EY and really strategically intentionally designing digital accessibility, making sure everybody's aware of the tools that are available and built into a lot of the platforms that we're using as well. So it's helpful for everybody. Sure.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think it's intriguing. It's something I'm going to sort of research more myself. Sophia, Moa, thank you so much for sharing sort of your lived experiences. I really appreciate you sharing that personal side of your, sort of what you've encountered in terms of oversharing, as well as, just sort of accommodations and support that have worked for you. Let's see, just moving on to the next part, I see that there's factors that impact neurodivergent professionals' career path. And a lot of times organizations tend to stick with the tried and true, the linear career path to management. And what we're seeing now is a need to create more diversity in our processes for neurodivergent professionals. A-Spectrum, makes a point to put emphasis on hiring neurodivergent coaches as well as staff, because we feel like that's the best way to support the folks that we're supporting, is to, nothing for us without us. So, but Sophia, I'm wondering if you could touch a little bit on some of your employment journey and some of the things that you've experienced in terms of the, the expectation of the linear career path and no gaps in the resume and that kind of thing.
So for me, I don't have the most linear career path. It took me a little bit longer to finish my undergrad, because having ADHD, I took 4 classes instead of the conventional 5. It helped me sort of manage the course load or the caseload more. Even in grad school, I had a baby in grad school, so that prolonged it a little bit more. And I was always very insecure because right after grad school, I had another baby, so 2 in a row very quickly. And I paused for a bit. And that pause, I didn't realize what the pause would do. And I got a lot of comments on it throughout my career journey or career sort of navigating, because I took part in a lot of informational job interviews. And there was a moment where it was brought up, and the employer or the person that I was speaking to said, "Oh, I see here on your resume that you have a career gap." And I was taken aback. I didn't expect her to bring it up. And she's like, why did you take that time off of work? And, dialing back to what Mohit and Tammy, you said, not knowing that I didn't really have to share and I didn't have to tell her why I took that time off. I didn't know that I had rights of my own to sort of not disclose and not answer these questions if I didn't want to. And, taking part in seminars and webinars like this, I learned as I went, right? So at that time, I didn't know. So I told her, I took some time off. I'm a stay-at-home mom. I want to go back to school. I was wondering if this course that I want to take is relevant. And she says, first of all, you're wasting even more time. You're almost in your 30s. You got to hurry this along a little bit. And I said, oh, and she's like, the only advice that I have to give to you is maybe share that you had, because I started explaining that I had health issues, and again, the oversharing came out, and I got very uncomfortable. And she says, well, maybe you should write that in your cover letter and say that you had health issues and that's why you took the time off. And then the employer will take pity on you and hire you. And it was terrible. And again, I didn't know my rights. I didn't realize that I didn't have to explain or justify why I took that time off. And I felt alienated. And I actually, for 3 months after that, I grappled with the idea of even going back to school at all. I gave up for a bit, and it was disheartening because I was already very insecure. And a lot of people made comments about the career gap, but no career path is completely linear, and there is no clear way or right way to go. And there's no limit or age sort of aged need to go back to school. My mom went back to school when she was 37 years old, but she made me feel like I needed to rush, that I was taking too long. And she didn't know that I had ADHD. I didn't disclose that it took me a little bit longer, but I didn't have to. And I didn't know that until later. So I wish I did. Maybe it would have changed the conversation.
We do as employers have to be mindful, right, that with technology, there are applicant tracking systems that will kick out things with employment gaps or, sentiment analysis, things that can actually be harmful to candidates. So I think, sometimes when you really get into those gaps, you'll find that candidate with a disability was on a gap because they were the most reliable person in the family to take care of somebody else who was ill as well, right? So really understanding those for sure.
It looks like we have some questions in the chat that they're hoping we could get to in real time. I see for Mohit and Sophia, have you shared your diagnoses with your employers? And if so, how did you do that? And also, do you find that sharing this information has helped or hindered your ability and has deliverable, and has it helped or hindered your professional development? So I'll throw that to Mohit first and let Sophia get a chance to take a sip of water.
Sure thing. So at my current role at EY, I've shared that with my manager, who is Tammy, about my diagnosis, and we had an informational interview before the hiring process began about the accommodations and the needs that I have. And I was quite upfront about it, and Tammy understood, and we were able to take it along further. For instances, a couple of accommodations that I need are I was not initially much comfortable to be working in person every day. So I was given the choice of working remotely. And also it was the pandemic. So the offices were also not allowing much work in person, and had to make certain accommodations myself to make my home and work environment more comfortable, where I can work at my full potential. Uh, and in my initial projects, I found that it took me a bit more time than my peers to understand and deliver the required work. So I would start my work a couple of hours early and would stay back for a couple of hours so that I can match it. But those were some initial adjustment, and with time I was able to match it, and now it's more like I'm more comfortable with that.
Thank you. Yeah. And Sophia, someone's also asking if your previous employer knew that you had ADHD.
My previous employer did, because I worked for McMaster University. They knew I was on the accommodation. I was using their accommodation. So they knew as a student, because I was a graduate student and a teaching assistant at the same time. It was all encompassing. They knew. So they were a very inclusive employer. And then when I started, then, I had that little career gap, and then Karen met me, but she knew because we had met at a conference already. And that's how, I sort of disclosed the fact that I had ADHD with her. And like you, Mohit, I like working at home. I do need more structure in my day. I need a routine to follow sometimes, and I need guidance, a lot of it. And Karen was always so wonderful to sort of shift and adapt to sort of help me with that. So yeah. So I have, most of them have known so far, but I don't know. I mean, after this point, I'm hoping I never have to share again because I'll be here. So we'll see.
Okay. We have a few minutes. We were going to open to more. So please, I guess, keep the questions coming. We were saving some time at the end as well. We talked a little bit about career progression. I'm just wondering, we had rolled around some topics that we don't always talk about. One was the inspiration porn, right? So oftentimes, especially in neurodiversity spaces and actually all disability spaces, right, we see sort of a tendency to objectify people, and in this space sometimes around superpowers associated, to really convey strengths to neurotypical or able-bodied folks. And so you know, some jokes and references about this. We know what the numbers are. The truth is that there are definitely strengths in all groups, and including neurodiverse populations. So so we know there's, you know, high numbers, 15% I think of autistic adults have extremely high intelligence. So a pretty significant number, in higher than even neurotypical folks. But at the same time, that doesn't mean across the board that we need to paint with a broad brush that everybody does. So sometimes I think it sets up expectations, and Karen and you and I have talked about some unrealistic expectations that employers can have at times, based on, you know, some of those stories and that phenomenon.
Yeah, I had an employer that we worked with, we were coaching someone that was working with them, and the person had asked for a day off for a doctor's appointment well in advance of the appointment. And the response from the employer was, "Oh, I thought you guys were supposed to be loyal." And yeah, you know, was how do you, sometimes there's the risk of like either overcompensating can also be, you know, a challenge, but also like this expectation of like, you know, a hero with superpowers, as you said, Tammy. Like it's just every person is an individual. They bring their own unique aptitudes and abilities, and should be treated that thusly. Like it's not the expectation that someone, you guys are loyal, was just clearly that was not the employer for them, and not the supported environment that we were looking for that person. But yeah, that was definitely impact.
Sorry, that's a great answer, by the way. I'm going to jump in. Haroon has a question. And I think it's, you know, pertinent. So once a person with some kind of disability is hired, how does the integration work with other employees? And then also, if you guys can address if you have any books. We had a question. Are there any books that you'd recommend on neurodiversity?
Yeah. I love Uniquely Human. Uniquely Human is a favorite, and there's a podcast as well. That's one of my favorites. Obviously, Neurotribes is a thick one and a wonderful one to sort of understand, right? Neurodiversity community as well. I don't know, Karen, if you would add to that.
I have Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before? Dr.
Yeah.
I love that. And it's humorous too. It has some humorous, and it's quirky and fun to read. And also Stanford University, if you're looking for resources, has like an unlimited access. They do a lot of, you know, specialty work in the neurodivergent community, and they have like limitless resources that are, a lot of them are publicly accessible as well, if you wanted to check that out.
Yeah.
Let's see, where are we along the way? Do we have any other questions in the chat, Elizabeth or Lisa?
Mohit, do you want to take the integration question? I think we're that Haroon had.
Yeah, sure. In my work, it happens almost every time that the team is more hybrid, where I work with a lot of neurotypical peers and even the client, where we set expectations right in front, and we have regular feedback sessions around if it's working out, if it or is there anything that I can do better. I provide regular feedback to my project manager and to Tammy about if the things are working out or not. There have been instances where I might not be getting along well with a teammate, or they have certain feedback. But in this case, communication has always been key to provide what's wrong or what's working well, so that moving onwards on the future projects, we can make sure how to uh, get along well.
Yeah, I think, you know, we're a large company, and even our team is, you know, 55 people now. So everybody's different. And I think one of the things I sometimes have to remind people is that, you know, we have such a broad range, right? Broad range of people who are open to sharing, as open as, right, Sophia has been, and other people who are very private. The other point is, of course, that changes over time. That's very dynamic. the longer you're with a company, or when you start to trust or feel just the psychological safety of that employer. So, you know, disclosure isn't necessarily, there's at any point, right? So some people will disclose before an interview. Some people will wait until after they've been offered a job. Some people will wait until after 90 days. Some will wait 13 years and share later, right? And especially in the neurodiversity world, we have, it's can be challenging to get a diagnosis. Some people are suspecting for many years. It can be, you know, some people wait until they're at a certain rank. I've seen that as well. There are lots of factors and opinions about that. So it's very dynamic. What I love about EY is there is a tendency for people to join us looking for a neurodiverse community and a specific experience that we offer, but also seeing over time that safety and trust and sort of openness and sharing growing over time as well. That's actually one of my sort of favorite things to witness, right, are those changes as well.
I mean, that's a great segue into a question from Lori. So as a neurodivergent employer, what would you suggest is a good way to help people understand where accommodations may be needed, or how to support a neurotypical person in the workplace? Because I think the assumption is that employers just naturally know this, which isn't the case.
And it's also very hard. So what we do as employers, when we don't share, this is how these are the accommodations we can offer, or the process for requesting accommodations, even through the hiring process, right? So, I mean, I could talk for days on sort of best practice hiring methodology about being transparent. These are the steps. These are the people that you're going to meet with. These are the questions you're going to be asked that may be given in advance, right? Like that we would love that everybody would sort of follow, because then it's easier for the employee to navigate how much they even need to share, if you know, because if the employer isn't communicating what's available and what that hiring process looks like, it's really putting the onus on the employee who doesn't know yet what the job is, or what that process is going to look like. And so they may feel like they have to share more than may be necessary through that process. I think, it's, we really focus on, our message at EY is always an open to sharing, right? So we value diversity of all types, disability included, and we're open to sharing. Is there anything that you need for the interview? Is there anything that you need through this hiring process? This is what our onboarding looks like. Is there anything additional that you think you may need, right? So it's a lot of just best practice communication. Doesn't cost anything to share what's going to happen, what's coming up. And I think from the anxiety perspective of the employee, knowing what those performance expectations are, knowing what's coming up, having that knowledge really helps reduce some of that anxiety as well.
You answered, it was so beautiful. You answered the next part of the question, which was, what is an appropriate and legal way to solicit information? And I love the way you phrased that. So thank you so much. That was excellent. And that you answered both questions. Grant has commented that he would love to see a standard process of asking about accommodations at time of hire. Do you have a comment about that?
So one thing is right. A lot of the applicant tracking systems have it in the fine print at the very bottom when you submit your application, right? Mm-hmm. Where's the email? Where do you reach out to? It sometimes tends to be very hidden. So I think, right, sometimes it may need to be messaged in the actual job description, and then in the template that some of those vendors provide, as well as standard language, to include it in, right? We and I think there are other things, right? We're looking at ours. We've sort of added, what happens with job descriptions is over time we add things and becomes a hodgepodge, right? So we value diversity and DEI, looking for all folks. Then we added a statement to sort of include more Indigenous professionals, and we've added more about neurodiversity, and you end up with this hodgepodge at the end. And then we've also, added in if you have many of these qualifications, even if not all, right, please apply, because we know that's a problem. So that was our most recent ad, was to say, we know that some people won't apply unless they have everything. If you think you meet a lot of these, just reach out to us, even if it's not for this application. So
Karen, can I ask you, we've got this amazing question in the chat. I've seen an increase in employers who are terminating a co-op student early on in their internship due to underperformance issues. We're not always privy to students' visible and invisible stories and their need for accommodation. However, I'm curious to know how we can better support students who may be neurodivergent or have a disability and that it's impacting their performance. How do we work with the employer to take this into consideration before judging the situation without having the full picture?
Yeah, well, this speaks directly to what A Spectrum does, right? We provide integration support so that when folks are integrating into a new workplace or a co-op or a placement, that they have a support. And I also really highly recommend there should never be a co-op placement or an internship without at least 1 to 2 buddies being provided for and an immediate sort of fast track into that sort of social network of the workplace and the cultural workplace. But we found that the integration support can increase retention significantly. I don't have the statistics on it, but I do know just from our own little test group, our own little petri dish, that we've seen, people that would tend to be let go in situations where they were misunderstood or considered to be underperforming, when they're working with a coach who can help advocate, who can help maybe identify accommodations, who can help, support that individual with all the newness of the opportunity. The success rate's been, instrumental. It's really, really, really indicative of the need for that almost to be built into placements, not just for people with neurodiversity or with disabilities, but everyone entering a new workplace would benefit from it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Sophia, we had somebody else who shared that they overshare all the time. And they wondered if you had any tips on how to manage that, because it feels unnatural and hard not to overshare. So do you have any advice for someone managing that?
Prepare responses. And I think I have little quips that I had for every interview or certain things already prepared. And they're so ingrained in me now that I stick to that script. It's like a script. And I don't like to say that because it seems inauthentic, but it really does help. Getting to know the environment that you're sort of speaking in and understanding the question itself, stick to the question, and, slow down and take a deep breath. And that's my method, and it's tried and true. It seems simple, but it's true. A breath can do a lot. And sometimes I forget to breathe. So just taking a breath before you start talking, it really does help.
I love that answer. And just for everybody on the call, that applies for people with and without disabilities. Practicing your answers and your responses and thinking about, what the other person on the other end of the conversation is experiencing is really important. I want to thank everybody for being on the call. We had, if anybody is aware of a VC organization, we had a question on that, just pop it in the chat. But Mohit, Sophia, Karen, Tammy, you guys were amazing. Thank you so much. I think this is one of the most engaged sessions we have. Maybe we have to do this and tackle some of the topics we weren't able to cover today. This video will be made available on our YouTube channel. We will be sending out a post-evaluation survey. I want to thank everybody on the call today, and I want to thank Dean and Brooke for providing ASL interpretation today. We appreciate that. Reach out to us. Have a great day. And again, thank you to this excellent panel. Really enjoyed hearing from you all.
Thanks for the opportunity. It was great.
Thank you so much for having us.
Everyone, appreciate it.